Hi guys, welcome back. We are here to continue the Gingerbread Bakery by Laurie Gilmore, and I'm super excited. Yesterday's video was a little short, so I'll try to make up for that today. And we left off on, I'll just continue with page 24. You're kidding. I'm dead serious. I was a little shit. Let me apologize, and then me and you can have a fresh start where you don't hate me anymore. Mac held out his hand expectantly. He was serious. Whatever she had been expecting from him, this was not it. She took her phone out of her purse and pulled up her text chain with Logan. The last message was a picture of a grinning Nana Estelle in between a frowning Grandpa Henry and a squinting Logan. They all had sunburn across their noses, and Estelle's giant sun hat nearly covered Logan's and his grandfather's faces. Annie hoped she was having the best time. She'd been waiting to go on this cruise her whole life. Mac's eyebrows rose in amusement when he saw the picture, but he didn't comment, just took the phone and typed out a message. He handed it back to Annie to approve before sending. Annie. Hey man, it's Mac. Sorry I was an asshole to you when we were kids. Hope you're having fun on your old folks' cruise. You know, this is very weird, right? Mac nodded. Yep. Annie hit send. They both stared at the phone on the table and waited for a response. It didn't take long before a string of question marks came through. Logan, question mark. Annie, I'm at the diner with Mac. Annie texted back to clarify. Logan, why? Annie, not sure really. Logan, okay. Annie, he wanted to apologize, I guess. Logan, weird. Apology accepted. He says he accepts your apology. Mac sighed. Phew. So do you forgive me too? Annie's phone buzzed again and she looked down. Logan, wait, are you on a date with Mac? She tossed the phone back in her bag. She would deal with Logan later. Okay, fine. I forgive you. There was that damn smile again. So maybe it wasn't just the sportiness that had the girls lining up at Mac's locker. Great. I don't know about you, but I feel better. His arms were stretched over the back of the seat, showing off the breadth of his chest. Annie swallowed a half-chewed fry and nearly choked again. Shouldn't you be playing lacrosse somewhere? Mac laughed. You know, I was captain of a not very good team in a very small school. College scouts weren't exactly lining up to recruit me. Oh, she wasn't sure how she felt about that. He didn't seem overly bitter, but the slightly lost expression he'd had when he told her about his cross-country plan was back. So, what have you been doing since graduation? She asked. Max shrugged. Mostly working at my dad's pub. What about you? You didn't want to go away to school somewhere? He asked. Somewhere other than Harvard? Why would I want to go away? I love it here. Mac laughed, but cut himself off when he realized she was serious. You don't feel the same way, obviously, she said, her earlier convictions that they had nothing in common, and this whole thing was stupid, returning. He leaned forward again, arms on the table. Whatever position he was in, he seemed to take up so much space. I'm just bored, I guess, or restless? I don't know. I feel like I need to figure things out. And you have to leave to do that? He nodded, taking another fry and dragging it through the ketchup. I think so, yeah. But you're still here. His cheeks flushed red at that observation that Annie thought maybe this big, strong guy was just as freaked out about the future as she was. I can help you map a route if you want, she blurted. I mean, I'm a pretty good planner. His smile grew again. That'd be cool, thanks, Annie. The pleasure that warmed her body at his praise was almost embarrassing. But lucky for Annie, no one was around to witness it. They spent the rest of the night with heads bent over Mac's phone, periodically scribbling places and ideas in the notebook Annie always carried with her, plotting the route that would take him far away from her. But by the time Gladys was kicking them out, they were closer than ever. Chapter 5. Now. Kira had set 4 of the wedding reception tables for the rehearsal dinner. She'd kept it simple with only candles for the centerpiece and little sprigs of rosemary on each napkin. The tablecloths were white and the plates mismatched china. The whole thing felt homey and intimate. As it turned out, Kira was quite good at this. Annie was impressed. She was seated between Iris and Bennett for dinner, and luckily Mac was at a different table because she really couldn't make any more promises about being on her best behavior if she had to sit next to him. After walking down the aisle where she had been subjected to memories of the other times she'd let her body get too close to his, she'd been trying to avoid him as much as possible, which was tricky to do since it wasn't exactly a big crowd. The guest list consisted of the bridal party, Logan's grandparents, a couple of Jenny's cousins, Mayor Kelly, who was officiating, and Archer and Iris. The rest of Jenny's family didn't get into town until the next morning, and everyone else had to wait for the big day on Sunday to be part of the fun. Annie slid into her seat, setting her plate down on the table. She'd filled it with slices of beef tenderloin, mashed potatoes, and haricot verts, which she'd learned this evening were just green beans, but Archer had made them all fancy. "This looks heavenly," she said, and Archer smiled at her as he placed a full plate in front of Iris and sat down beside her. "Enjoy," he said. "Does he feed you like this all the time?" Annie asked. "If so, it makes complete sense why you agreed to have his baby." Iris laughed, and the water she'd been drinking nearly sprayed from her mouth. She coughed into her hand, and Annie patted her back. "Sorry, didn't mean to make a pregnant lady choke." Iris shook her head. I'm fine, she said, waving away Annie's ineffective life-saving efforts. "And yes, he does feed me like this all the time." Annie laughed. "Damn, girl." "I know. I would carry the man's baby for a meal like this every night," Bennett said from Annie's other side, and Iris burst out laughing again. Archer winked at Bennett, and the girls laughed even harder. "What's so funny over there?" Mayor Kelly asked from across the table. "Oh, we're just discussing what we would do for Archer in exchange for this food every night," Annie said with a smile, and the mayor's eyebrows rose above his glasses. "So, Pete, do you have the ceremony ready for Sunday?" Estelle asked, changing the subject before the mayor could weigh in, which was probably for the best. "Mostly, I want to get a few more thoughts from the bride and groom, but I think I'm ready to go." "You're going to do great, Dad," Hazel said, patting him on the back from her seat beside him. "It's going to be lovely, I'm sure," Estelle said, and then turned her attention to Jenny, who was seated at the next table. "Jenny," she called, "have you given any thought to what you're wearing on the wedding night?" Annie could see the furious blush on Logan's face from across the room. She and Iris descended into more giggles. Not really," Jenny said. Estelle smiled. "Okay, very good. I have just the thing." "Well, that's ominous," Annie whispered, and Iris agreed. "I don't think I want to know." The evening went on with more drinks and food and laughter. Archer had outdone himself, and Annie couldn't imagine how Sunday's meal would be any better, but she knew it would be. "We should probably test out the dance floor," Noah said, coming up beside Hazel and putting out a hand to her. "We probably should," Hazel smiled up at him, and Annie couldn't help the small pangs she felt any time she was around her friends lately. She loved them all, and she was so happy that they had each found their person. But when everyone had their person, it really emphasized the fact that she didn't. She could feel Mac's eyes on her from the other table as more and more guests got up to dance. She didn't allow herself to look at him. Instead, she very gratefully accepted an offer from Jenny's cousin when he asked her to dance. The music was slow and romantic, and Annie had enough wine to feel pleasantly warm. She couldn't help but think that if she had been dancing with someone she cared about, the moment would have been quite lovely. Hazel's head rested on Noah's shoulder as they danced. Iris and Archer couldn't take their eyes off each other, and Kira had taken a break from her hosting duties to dance with Bennett. Her laughter filled up the room when he dipped her, and never mind Jenny and Logan, Annie wasn't sure their feet even touched the ground as they danced, whispering quietly to each other in their own little world. They were all so happy, so settled, and in a group of couples, Annie had quickly become the only single left. Well, and Mac. She really needed to get more friends. "So that's why I don't feel any geckos. My gecko's crickets," Annie blinked. What was that?" she asked. She'd totally not been listening to whatever her dance partner had been going on about. In fact, she wasn't even sure she caught his name. "Crickets," he repeated. "They give off a weird smell, so I prefer to feed my gecko pellets only." Annie stared at him in horror before she remembered to be polite. "Of course, that makes sense," she said, forcing a smile on her face. "Well, thank you so much for the dance." She pulled away even though the song was not over. She'd had enough cricket talk for one evening. As she made her way across the dance floor and away from Gecko Guy, she caught Mac following her with his gaze. Okay. He sat at the table chatting with Henry and Mayor Kelly, but his eyes were on her. She needed to get out of here. She needed a break from all of it, from Mac, from the happy couples, from the insanely romantic wedding Kira had planned. It was all too much. She stepped out of the barn and into the cold night air and took a deep breath. She was fine. Everything was fine. She took another deep breath of the pine-scented breeze as she tried to convince herself that everything really was fine. She stared up at a sky filled with stars. Annie didn't make a habit of being lovesick, and she certainly wasn't going to start now. Once this wedding was over, everything would go back to normal. She would go back to avoiding Mac, and her singleness wouldn't be quite so painfully obvious. She had her friends and her family and her bakery. She didn't need a dance partner. Right, 2 more days to go. She could do this. But by the time the already small crowd had dwindled even further to just Iris, who was waiting for Archer and his crew to finish clearing the food, and Mayor Kelly, who was going over his notes for the ceremony with Logan, Annie was looking for any distraction to keep between her and Mac. Hold on. Okay, sorry. Hazel and Noah had left to drive a tipsy Jenny home, and Bennett had gone to escort the Ellis cousins to the inn. What else can I do? She asked Kira to avoid watching Max spin Iris in a slow circle on the dance floor. I think we're done for the night, Kira plopped down into the nearest chair. We should probably get some sleep. We have more work to do tomorrow. Right, manicures and pedicures, followed by finishing up the secret wedding dessert and helping Kira decorate the barn. She was hoping Mac wouldn't be a part of any of it. Maybe she wouldn't have to see him again until Sunday, and then there would be enough other stuff going on she'd barely have to interact with him, except for the whole pesky walking down the aisle business. What happened between you two anyway? Kira asked, following Annie's gaze to where Mac was now, talking with Archer and Iris, the dance over. Annie sighed. It really doesn't matter. It kind of seems like it does. Mac looked up and caught her in his gaze. Sometimes it felt like a million years ago that she had let herself fall for that cocky team captain, and sometimes it felt like she was still that girl letting herself trust that boy. Mac's lips tipped into a tentative smile, and Annie was right back in that diner booth, trying to convince herself that they didn't make sense together, that he couldn't possibly like her. But he had convinced her that he did, and for that one December, she'd let herself believe him. And look where it had gotten her, stuck on a guy who would never be right for her. She turned away from Mac's smile. We were young and stupid. Hold on. Kira's brows rose. This was the most Annie had ever confessed about what happened between her and Mac. For some reason, it felt a little easier to tell Kira, who hadn't been around Annie and Mac her whole life and had only showed up in town a year ago. You were young and stupid, and it was over before it really started. Kira sighed in disappointment. I feel like you're holding out on me, but I'm exhausted, so I'm going to let you get away with it for now. She stood up and planted a kiss on Annie's cheek. I'll see you in the morning. Okay, yeah, see you in the morning. Annie went to find where she'd stashed her purse and coat, and by the time she turned around to leave, the barn was empty except for one person, of course. Walk you out? Mac asked, heading toward her across the dance floor. Annie's body went into fight-or-flight mode. I think I can make it out down the driveway to my car without your assistance. Thank you very much. Okay, so fight it was. Mac blew out a frustrated sigh. Can I walk out with you, Annie, or do I need to give you a 5-minute head start so you don't have to endure being next to me for a second longer? She glanced at him and was about to tell him he could walk right off a cliff when Kira popped her head back into the big barn doors. Forgot to turn out the lights. She hit the switch and the lights in the barn went out, save for the strings of twinkle lights crisscrossed over the rafters. And the traitor scurried away before Annie could accuse her of being just as bad as everyone else in this busybody town. She turned back to Mac with a huff to find him staring at her in the warm glow of the Christmas lights. He wasn't smirking or winking or doing any of that bullshit that made it easy to hate him. He was just watching her with such fondness in his eyes that Annie thought she might choose flight now. Hold on just a moment. Damn that Kira, she whispered, and Mac let out a low laugh. It's a nice effect. He glanced up at the ceiling where the strings of lights hung. Very Christmassy, Annie mumbled back, falling deeper into the trance of staring at Mac in the low lights. It reminded her too much of another time she'd seen Mac in the glow of Christmas lights, when she'd seen the way he looked flushed and happy and undone, the twinkle of lights on his bronze skin, something she'd seared into her memory. When he looked at her again, she knew he was remembering the same thing. Annie. His voice was rough when he spoke, and at some point, he'd moved closer. She could feel herself being pulled toward him. Do you remember that night? Of course I remember that night, she snapped. The night of Christmas lights and Mac's bare skin against hers? How could she forget it? Max smirked a little at the mention of it. Not that night. The night we went out on the Christmas lights tour. Now Annie was smiling too, lost in the memories. Yeah, that was fun. Mac was even closer now, his nose practically brushing her cheek, his words gentle and warm against her skin. That was my favorite night. Her breath caught. That was his favorite night, the night he held her hand and they laughed and talked until 2 a.m. And they didn't even kiss, but the promise of it was there. Thinking about it was like pushing on a bruise. It still hurt, even all these years later. I wish we could have that back, he whispered, and Annie wanted to close her eyes and give in to that thought. She wanted to have that feeling back too, but she remembered all too well what came after that feeling. All the months she had thought about him, she had waited for him. It wasn't only her heart that had been bruised, it was her ego. And somehow that was so much worse. She swallowed hard. We were so young, she said, instead of all the other thoughts racing through her head. I still feel like that when I look at you. When had his hands landed on her hips? When had he tugged her clothes? When had they started to sway to some imaginary song, having the slow dance she'd avoided earlier? Annie let her head rest against his chest, and she felt the sigh shudder through him. She gave herself exactly 3 breaths to remember the good times and forget everything else. 3 inhales of Mac's familiar spicy scent, 3 exhales to steel herself before she pulled away. Mac's fingers dug into her hips just for a second before letting her go. We should go, she said, unable to meet his eye. He still stood close to her, and she was afraid he would touch her again, afraid of what she would do if he did. But finally, he nodded. Right, we probably should. They walked out into the cold air, and the dreamy moment in the barn was wiped away. It didn't matter if Mac knew how to sweet-talk her these days. It didn't matter if the memories were tempting. It didn't matter how damn good his arms felt around her. Annie had made a promise to the girl she was all those years ago. The girl who had let herself fall for a guy she knew she had no business falling for. To the girl who decided to trust and to love against her better judgment. To the girl who'd waited around for Macaulay Sullivan for a goddamn year only to be left in the dust. She'd sworn she'd never let him back into her life. And she wasn't about to break her promise now. Chapter 6, then. How can you possibly be this excited? You know you can just drive past any of these houses on your own. Mac breathed into his hands in an unsuccessful attempt to warm his frozen fingers. How could you not be excited? Annie was standing next to him on the lawn in front of the town hall, bundled up in a puffy coat, knit hat, and mittens that he was frankly jealous of. Her cheeks were rosy and her eyes were lit up in anticipation. And it suddenly seemed like a real oversight that he'd never noticed how cute she was. Although, to be fair, she was much cuter when she wasn't scowling at him. Apologizing to her friend had really gone a long way. He knew now that messing with anyone Annie loved was a deal breaker, and he also knew the girl could hold a grudge. I don't think I've done this since I was 10. You've been missing out. The Dream Harbor Christmas Lights Tour is one of my favorite holiday traditions. They were waiting for one of the school bus turned tour buses to return to pick up the next load of passengers. It would then drive them around the Dream Harbor neighborhoods to admire the light displays. The crowd was almost entirely old folks discussing who they thought would have the best setup this year, and small children running in circles while their parents tried in vain to get them to calm down. The consumption of candy canes and hot chocolate while they waited probably wasn't helping. Mac blew into his hands again. Annie watched him with a small smile. You're cold. You're cold? Not too bad. Why do you guys do that? Do what? Pretend they're never cold. Do they revoke your man card if you admit to being chilly? Mac huffed a laugh, his breath clouding in front of him. I'm fine. He stamped his feet a little to get feeling back into his toes. Probably shouldn't have worn sneakers. Annie raised an amused eyebrow. You'd rather freeze to death than wear a hat? He looked terrible in hats, so yes, he'd rather die than wear one in front of a cute girl. But he was not about to admit that level of fragility. I didn't think it was this cold out. It hasn't even snowed yet. Annie rolled her eyes and made a point of tugging her hat down over her ears. It looked soft and cozy. Damn it, he was an idiot. He wished he had a hat and mittens and lined boots. Where's this bus anyway? He muttered, rubbing his hands together until Annie finally took pity on him. Stop! She took his hands between her mittened ones, enclosing him in her warmth. Better? So much better, but it wasn't only because of his hands. Annie was close to him now, and all the things he'd never noticed about her were right there. Her cute little upturned nose, the dip in her full upper lip, the slight flush on her cheeks, a few wisps of blonde hair had escaped her hat, and he had the bizarre urge to tuck them behind her ear. Annie was pretty, like really pretty. What the hell was wrong with him? How do you look at someone for 13 years and not realize they're actually beautiful? This gorgeous girl had been in front of him his whole life, and somehow he was only now noticing. As he stood there staring at Annie's lips, had they always been so pink? Another inconvenient truth revealed itself. Mac wanted to kiss her, like he really wanted to kiss her. He wanted to kiss that mouth that used to do nothing but frown at him. The mouth that now looked so appealing and sweet, tipped up slightly in the corner like she was amused by him. Mac, do your hands feel better? Oh shit, he'd been standing here staring at her like an idiot. Much, he cleared his throat. Much better, thanks. Annie smiled, rubbing her hands over his. Good, can't have you losing any fingers and ruining the tour. So glad you were worried about my well-being. Annie laughed. Nope, just the Christmas lights. He laughed too, because suddenly he was having fun at the stupid town tradition that he'd written off as childish. Because Annie liked it. Because maybe Annie liked him. Or she at least didn't hate him anymore. But leaning down to kiss her right now was probably a bad idea, right? Right. They were only hanging out because no one else was in town, and they'd agreed they were both bored. Nothing about that was grounds for suddenly kissing someone, except for the fact that the way Annie was looking at him right now, he thought maybe she wouldn't mind. Maybe he could. Maybe she wanted him to. Well, Mac wondered if Annie was the kind of girl that wanted to be asked first, or if he should just go for it. The bus pulled up, the screech and hiss of the brakes fully ruining the moment anyway. Let's go! Annie dropped his hands and quickly joined the line of people slowly making their way onto the bus. He followed her up the steps and was greeted by his kindergarten teacher in a Santa hat sitting in the driver's seat. Merry Christmas, Nancy greeted each passenger. Merry Christmas, Miss DeMarco. Well, if it isn't two of my favorite students, this is certainly a lie. Mac had spent a considerable amount of time in the cozy corner, taking a break when he was in Miss DeMarco's classroom. His listening ears and gentle hands never seemed to be working right, and he had to spend a lot of time thinking about that. He really had been a little shit back then. Annie beamed at their former teacher. Have you been good this year, Macaulay? Nancy peered at him from under her Santa hat. He's working on it, Annie said before they were forced to move on to allow more people onto the bus. They dropped into a seat in the back of the bus. He breathed out a sigh of relief as he sat and found Annie grinning at him. Worried you were going to have to stay in for recess? She asked between giggles. Don't mock my trauma, he said, causing Annie to laugh harder. Are you saying you were unfairly targeted? Oh no, I definitely deserved it, he said with a grin. But I'm trying to turn over a new leaf. I don't need people reminding you of my dark past. So dark, she said with a giggle. It's amazing you've been able to put it all behind you. As long as she had put it behind her, that was all he really cared about. Annie pulled off her hat, shaking her hair free. While it had been freezing outside, the bus was uncomfortably warm. The windows were already fogged over. She took off her mittens and wriggled out of her coat and then sat back in the seat with a dramatic gasp. Phew, that's better. Let me try to... Okay. Oh, hold on. page 44, sorry. It was better because now he could see all that golden hair he used to stare at instead of focusing on word problems, and he could see the snug sweater Annie had been wearing under her coat. Annie was hot. Again, he wondered what the hell he had been doing his whole life, not paying attention to this beautiful girl. All because what? She didn't come to his lacrosse games? Stupid. But he was here now, crammed into a school bus seat with her, and this time he was not going to hesitate. He casually slung an arm around Annie's shoulder, snuggling in closer so he could look out the window with her. All right, he said with a smile, his lips dangerously close to Annie's ear. Let's see some lights. Annie plucked Mac's arm from her shoulder and wriggled out of his grasp. You're kidding, right? He grinned. Worth a shot. Annie rolled her eyes and turned her attention back out the window, even as her cheeks heated up the way Mac was looking at her. What the hell did this guy think he was doing anyway, putting his arm around her like they were dating or something, when she knew for a fact he was out of here for after the new year. She'd helped him plan the damn route. Not to mention, she'd never live it down if Hazel and Logan found out she was hooking up with Mac, of all people, after she'd done nothing but malign his character for the past 13 years. There was no way her friends would let it go. She shuddered at the thought. You can't possibly be cold, Mac said, misinterpreting her shiver. It's like 800 degrees on this bus. He leaned across her to wipe the condensation from the window, forcing her to be subjected to his arms again. Strong arms, muscular arms, and his warm spice scent washed over her, making her close her eyes and breathe deep. Okay, so Annie hadn't exactly made dating a priority in high school. In fact, she may have forgotten to do it at all. But who had the time, really? Between student council and her AP classes, Annie barely had time to see her friends. But now, with Max so close and oozing his unique brand of masculinity all over her, she thought that not dating may have been an oversight. She hadn't had the chance to become immune to things like strong arms and whatever it was that made Max smell so good. Unless you counted Logan, which she 100% did not, Annie hadn't spent much time around teenage boys. Sure, she'd slow danced with Aiden Smith at the 9th grade winter formal, and there had been that underwhelming makeout session with Seth Bates after she kicked his butt at mock trial, but in general, she had never seen the appeal of adolescent males until right now. Annie nudged Mac back onto his half of the seat in a desperate attempt to get her head on straight. His proximity was doing weird things to her judgment. Not cold, just excited to see the lights, she lied. The bus was slowly trundling down Main Street, Christmas music playing over the speakers, and she tried to focus on that instead of Mac's newly uncovered charms. Annie had a life plan to manage, a cookie empire to build. She did not have time for distractions. She'd only agreed to the second meetup. She would not call it a date because she wanted to see the lights, and her sisters were all refusing to come this year. She dug into her oversized purse and pulled out a bag of freshly baked sugar cookies she'd made for the occasion. She held them out to Mac, and the sound he made when he bit into one was so obscene that the older couples in the seat next to them turned in shock, as though they thought something untoward was happening over here. Annie felt her cheeks go up in flames. Damn, Annie, you really know what you're doing with these cookies, he said, eyes closed, head leaning back on the seat. Of course I do. Mac's lips tipped into a smirk, even as his eyes remained closed. I should have known. Known what? He opened his eyes and rolled his head to face her. That you would be good at anything you tried. Annie swallowed hard. I'm definitely not. Mac shrugged. Well, you're good at cookie baking. Thanks. Had it gotten even warmer in here? Why had Mac's words had such an effect on her? She knew she was good at baking, but she also knew that she tossed 3 imperfect batches of those same cookies into the trash today, and these were the only ones that made the cut, and that sometimes she wondered how she would put this crazy dream of hers into action. What if she worked hard and it still didn't happen? What if she tried and failed? What's the matter? You look like I just told you your dog died instead of complimenting you. I don't have a dog, she said weakly, trying to avoid the topic of her paralyzing fear of failure. She forced a smile. I'm fine. I'm glad you like the cookies. Mac looked at her like he wasn't totally buying that, but they turned down a side street and slowed down so that passengers could admire the first row of lit-up houses. If you look to your left, Nancy's voice came over the speaker as the whole bus turned their attention to the left-hand side. We have Mr. and Mrs. Harris's home, which has the country's biggest display of nutcrackers. The crowd dutifully oohed and awed at the army of nutcrackers displayed on the lawn. To your right is the first of many nativity scenes on our route, this one with life-size figures. Jesus, Mac breathed. Exactly, Annie quipped, and he laughed, his warm breath brushing her ear again, since they both turned to look out the window. Another shiver ran through her. I'm surprised they didn't have a live camel, he said. Just wait until we get to the Christmas tree farm. It's the last stop, but I hear the owner, Edmund, rented a real camel and several sheep this year. Wow. Yep. Mac was encroaching onto her side of the seat again, and she should really push him away. She had no business with a guy like Mac, and he was obviously just passing the time until his friends came home. They both were. But then she remembered the sound he made when he bit into that sugar cookie and the way he looked at her as she warmed his frozen hands, and the thought maybe she could take a small detour from her grand plans. Just for the next few weeks, just until life returned to normal after the holidays. They turned a sharp corner and she nearly fell into Mac's lap, and the universe settled things for her. When he wrapped his arms around her again, Annie didn't push him away. This okay? He whispered in her ear. She nodded and snuggled in closer as the lit-up houses passed by the window. Yeah, it's okay. It was perfectly okay that she was cuddled up with the one boy she claimed to hate, while secretly harboring a crush on him that she never would have admitted, even under threat of torture. But his arms felt so nice, and it was her favorite time of year, and the bus was so cozy with its twinkling lights and Christmas music. It was perfectly okay. She leaned back on Mac as through the window the light displays got more and more dramatic. She smiled as he gasped at the giant house on the end of Elm Street that had a full-size sleigh on the roof pulled by 8 lit-up reindeer, and by the time he was enumerating his reasons for preferring multicolored lights over white ones, she knew she'd officially sold him on the Dream Harbor Lights tour. When they got off the bus and Mac was still holding her hand as they walked back to his car, she wasn't sure what else she'd sold him on, or if she was buying into whatever was happening here. But when Mac said he didn't want the night to be over yet, she said she didn't either. And when he invited her to his place, she said yes. Ooh. Chapter 7. Now, Annie was getting dressed when her phone rang. Hey, Hayes, I thought we were meeting at 9. Annie glanced at her watch. She wasn't late. She couldn't be late. Too much to do today. First the spa with Jenny and the girls, then finishing up her special gift for the bride and groom, and then helping Kira set up the tables and flowers. And if she could manage it, she had a few dozen cookie orders that needed filling before Monday. Worst case scenario, she could just skip sleep. She'd done that plenty of times before. The appointment got moved to the afternoon. Okay, great. But that's not why I called, Hazel sounded frazzled, and frankly, that was ominous on the day before the wedding. What's going on? Annie put her phone on speaker while she brushed some mascara on her top lashes. Have you seen Estelle? Annie paused mid-mascara swipe. Why would I have seen Logan's grandmother at 8:30 in the morning, Hayes? I don't know, but no one else has seen her either. Wait, hold on. Are you telling me that Logan's grandmother, his beloved Nana, is missing the day before his wedding? Yes. Hazel, what the hell? Have you tried calling her? Of course I did. I was supposed to take her to get her hair done today, and I called her to confirm, and she didn't answer her cell phone. So I called the house, and Henry said she left early this morning. Left to go where? Annie was shouting and pacing in her tiny bathroom, which was really only 2 steps in one direction and 2 steps in the other. She was getting dizzy. I don't know, Hazel wailed, having moved far beyond frazzled into panic territory. Annie sat on. Fine, she said begrudgingly. You can pick up Estelle. Great, from where? I don't know, Annie said, moving toward the door. She flipped off the lights, including the twinkle lights she'd strung up for Christmas. Mac followed along, still looking around at her apartment like he was taking mental notes about the fact that she had unfolded laundry in a basket and dirty dishes in the sink. She couldn't be perfect all the time. What do you mean you don't know? She's missing. The shocked look on Mac's face as he stood frozen in her doorway was almost entertaining enough to distract Annie from the fact that a missing grandmother was not funny at all, and that she just recruited Mac to help her search. On chapter 8. Okay, that is going to be it for today, guys. We left off on page 61, chapter 8. So, well, we know how the ending's gonna be, but how's it gonna happen? That's the fun part. The intimate moments, the funny, it's like a Hallmark movie, basically. These books are really good. Let's go over the front real quick. Yeah, here's a map of Dream Harbor. This is in all of them. Oh, there's a playlist in here. Landslide by, yeah, there's some Taylor Swift and Chapel Roan. Cool. Alrighty. So I have a couple new backgrounds coming in. I hope you guys like this one. This is very cool. This is the kind of thing I want to open someday. This is my dream, so I have it back here. And actually, my kitchen's right in front, so I look at it all the time. I've been keeping it up. But the next one's going to be super cool, and I can't wait. I kind of don't want to read too much ahead. I want to have those backgrounds to read this because I want it to be intimate. Like this reading thing. Warm, cozy, feelings, all the things. That's what you envision in your mind of what's going on in the book. Kind of having that in the background. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this so far, and she's a best-selling author for a reason. I absolutely love her. I love every single book I've read. They all get good. They're all different. And yeah. Even the detail in the cover is cool. I need to do something about the memory on my phone, but I will see you guys tomorrow. We will read for about a half an hour tomorrow. Like I said, I don't want to do this too fast without the background. I may skip tomorrow just so I can have it. Don't read without me. Don't read without me. Okay, so I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.